"She's taking such good care of you while you recover," the nurse said, glancing admiringly at my best friend Maya Roman as she adjusted the flowers by my bedside, my grandmother's vintage sapphire wedding ring catching the harsh fluorescent light on her finger. Those words hung in the sterile recovery room air like a death sentence, because that ring had been on my finger when they wheeled me into surgery 3 days ago. I lay motionless in my hospital bed, the steady rhythm of machines monitoring my vital signs, providing a mechanical soundtrack to the most devastating betrayal of my life. My abdomen throbbed beneath layers of surgical dressings from the emergency appendectomy that had saved my life. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. But that physical pain was nothing compared to the knife Maya had just twisted into my heart. I studied her face, the face I'd trusted for 15 years, as she spoke softly to the nurse about my delicate condition and how she was coordinating everything with my husband Lucas during this difficult time. The irony almost made me laugh through the haze of post-surgical medication. Maya Roman, my maid of honor, my confidant, the woman who had held my hand through every major life crisis, was now wearing the symbol of my marriage, while orchestrating what appeared to be the systematic destruction of my life. But what she didn't know, what nobody in this room knew, was that I had been awake for the past 20 minutes, listening, watching, and remembering every detail of the conversation that had just revealed the true scope of her betrayal. "How is Lucas handling everything?" the nurse asked, her voice filled with the kind of practiced sympathy reserved for family members of critical patients. Maya's expression shifted into what I recognized as her concerned friend performance. A slight furrow of her brow, a delicate sigh, the way she clasped her hands together as if steadying herself for difficult news. "He's devastated, of course," Maya replied, her voice carrying just the right tremor of emotion. "The doctors aren't sure about Jenna's long-term recovery. The complications during surgery were significant. Lucas is trying to be strong, but he's asked me to handle the immediate decisions while Jenna heals." She paused, touching the ring, my ring, with her thumb in a gesture that seemed almost possessive. "We've been discussing some practical arrangements. The house, the business decisions that can't wait." My blood ran cold despite the warm blankets covering me. What business decisions? What arrangements? Lucas Reed and I had built our consulting firm from nothing over the past 8 years. Our partnership, both professional and personal, creating the life we'd dreamed of together. Maya had been there for every milestone. Our first major client, our wedding day, the purchase of our dream home in the suburbs. She'd been the photographer at our engagement party, the one who suggested the venue for our reception, the person who knew every detail of our financial arrangements because she'd been our accountant since the beginning. The nurse's pager buzzed, interrupting my racing thoughts. "I should check on my other patients," she said, her sneakers squeaking against the linoleum as she moved toward the door. "Press the call button if Jenna shows any signs of waking up. The doctor wants to monitor her neurological responses closely." "Of course," Maya responded, settling into the chair beside my bed with the familiarity of someone who had claimed territory. "I'll stay with her. Lucas trusts me completely to watch over her." As the door closed behind the nurse, Maya's demeanor changed instantly. The performance mask slipped away, replaced by something I had never seen before. Cold calculation mixed with what looked disturbingly like satisfaction. She pulled out her phone, typing rapidly, then glanced at me to ensure I remained unconscious before placing a call. "It's me," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yes, everything is going exactly as planned. The surgery complication story is working perfectly. Everyone believes she's in critical condition with possible brain damage." She paused, listening to whoever was on the other end. "Lucas signed the papers this morning. He was so distraught about potentially losing her that he didn't even read the fine print about the temporary business management clause." My heart pounded so hard I was terrified the monitors would betray my consciousness, but somehow my vital signs remained steady. Maya continued her conversation, oblivious to my awareness. "The ring was easier than expected. The nurses removed all her jewelry for surgery, and I simply took responsibility for keeping it safe. When she wakes up, if her cognitive function is impaired, as the doctors suggested it might be, she'll be grateful that someone she trusts is handling the important details." Maya's laugh was soft but carried an edge I'd never heard before. By the time she's fully recovered, the new arrangements will be completely legal and established. Lucas is already dependent on my support through this crisis." The call ended, and Maya returned to her concerned friend persona as footsteps approached in the hallway. But I had heard enough. My best friend hadn't just stolen my wedding ring. She had somehow manipulated my medical crisis to gain control over my business, my marriage, and apparently my entire life while I lay unconscious and vulnerable. What Maya didn't know, what she couldn't have known, was that this betrayal was about to become the biggest mistake of her life. Because while she had been busy performing the role of devoted friend to the outside world, I had been preparing for exactly this kind of scenario for months. Not this specific situation, of course. I could never have imagined that my closest friend would be the threat. But I had learned long ago that in business and in life, protection required preparation. The signs had been there if I had chosen to see them. Maya's increasing interest in the financial details of our business. Her subtle questions about Lucas's decision-making process. Her suggestions about modernizing our partnership agreements. Her insistence on being my emergency contact for everything from medical procedures to business accounts. The way she had positioned herself as indispensable to both Lucas and me, the trusted friend who knew every password, every legal document, every vulnerability in our carefully constructed life. But Maya had made one critical error in her calculations. She had assumed that Jenna Hayden, the trusting friend, the grateful client, the woman who had relied on her expertise for nearly a decade, would remain helpless even after regaining consciousness. She had no idea that beneath the surface of our friendship, I had been quietly building safeguards that would make her betrayal not just impossible to complete, but ultimately self-destructive. As I lay in that hospital bed, listening to her make another phone call about managing Jenna's affairs during her recovery, I allowed myself a small, invisible smile. Maya thought she was 3 steps ahead of everyone else. She had no idea that the game had already been won, and she had just revealed herself as the opponent I never knew I was playing against. The machines continued their steady beeping, measuring a heartbeat that belonged to someone much stronger than Maya Roman had ever imagined. She was about to learn that the quiet ones, the ones who listen, who observe, who prepare, are often the most dangerous when they finally decide to act. The friendship that would ultimately destroy my trust began in the most innocent way possible, a chance encounter in a college statistics class that neither of us wanted to take. I was Jenna Hayden then, a business major with dreams of entrepreneurship and a natural talent for seeing patterns others missed. Maya Roman sat 2 rows behind me, struggling with concepts that came easily to me, her frustration evident in the way she'd tap her pen against her notebook during lectures. When Professor Harrison announced our semester-long group project, I watched Maya's face fall as other students quickly formed their teams. She was beautiful in that effortless way that made people assume everything came easily to her. Long auburn hair, green eyes that seemed to hold secrets, and a smile that could convince anyone of anything. But behind that confidence, I recognized something familiar. The fear of being overlooked, of not being good enough. "Want to partner with me?" I had asked after class, approaching her table where she sat alone, surrounded by scattered notes and what looked like the beginning of tears. Her relief was so genuine, so grateful that it made my heart ache for the vulnerability she was trying so hard to hide. "I'm terrible at this," Maya had confessed as we worked through our first study session in the library. "Numbers just don't make sense to me the way they do to you. I watch you solve these problems like you're reading a story, and I can barely figure out which formula to use." That was how it started. Me helping Maya understand statistical analysis, while she helped me navigate the social aspects of college life I found intimidating. She taught me how to speak up in group discussions, how to present ideas with confidence, how to dress for networking events. I taught her how to read financial statements. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. How to spot inconsistencies in data, how to build business models that actually worked. Our partnership was symbiotic and, I thought, genuine. Maya's natural charisma opened doors that my analytical mind alone never could have accessed. She was the one who convinced our professor to recommend our project to the university's business incubator program. She was the one who charmed potential investors at pitch competitions, while I provided the substance behind her presentations. After graduation, it seemed natural that we would continue working together. Maya had discovered a talent for client relations and business development, while I excelled at strategy and operations. We complemented each other perfectly, or so I believed. When I met Lucas Reed at a networking event 2 years later, Maya was the first person I called to share the news of my attraction to the quiet, thoughtful consultant who specialized in organizational psychology. "He's perfect for you," Maya had said after meeting Lucas for the first time over dinner at my apartment. "Smart enough to challenge you, calm enough to balance your intensity, and completely smitten. I can see it in the way he looks at you when you're explaining business concepts." She had laughed, raising her wine glass in a toast. To Jenna, who finally found someone who appreciates her brilliant mind. Lucas and I built our consulting firm, Hayden Reed Strategic Solutions, with Maya serving as our primary accountant and business advisor. She helped us structure our partnership agreements, manage our client contracts, and navigate the complex financial arrangements that came with rapid growth. When Lucas proposed 3 years later, Maya was the one who helped him plan the surprise, ensuring every detail was perfect, down to the vintage sapphire ring that had belonged to my grandmother. "This ring has been waiting for the right love story," Maya had told me, as she helped me get ready for what I thought was just a casual dinner date. "Your grandmother would be so happy to see it representing something so beautiful." She had fastened the clasp of my necklace, her hands gentle and sure, and I had trusted her completely with the most precious moments of my life. The wedding planning process revealed Maya's true talents for organization and attention to detail. She coordinated with vendors, managed timelines, and somehow made the entire process feel effortless, despite the complexity of merging 2 lives and 2 businesses. She stood beside me as my maid of honor, tears streaming down her face during the ceremony, and I had believed those tears represented pure joy for my happiness. "You deserve this," she had whispered as she adjusted my veil before I walked down the aisle. "You've worked so hard for everything, and now you have everything you've ever wanted." Looking back now, I wondered if those words had carried a different meaning than I understood at the time. Had Maya been cataloging what I had? The successful business, the devoted husband, the financial security, and already planning how to claim it for herself? The signs of change were subtle at first. Maya's increasing involvement in the day-to-day operations of our business, her suggestions about protecting our assets through more complex legal structures, her insistence on being listed as an emergency contact for both Lucas and me. She framed these requests as practical necessities for a growing business, and we trusted her expertise completely. "You're both so busy with client work," she had explained when she proposed taking over more of our administrative responsibilities. "Let me handle the back end so you can focus on what you do best." It made perfect sense. Maya had always been the one who handled details we found tedious, who remembered appointments we might forget, who ensured nothing fell through the cracks. She became indispensable gradually, systematically. Our business accounts required her signature for efficiency. Our insurance policies listed her as a secondary contact for convenience. Our legal documents included provisions she had recommended for protection. Each change was logical, beneficial, and completely above board. Maya Roman, the struggling statistics student I had helped 15 years ago, had become the woman who held every key to my life. And now, lying in this hospital bed with her voice still echoing in my ears as she planned my professional and personal destruction, I realized that her gratitude had slowly transformed into something much darker. A sense of entitlement to everything I had built, everything I had earned, everything I had trusted her to protect. The student had surpassed the teacher, but not in the way either of us had ever imagined. The pain started on a Tuesday morning while I was reviewing quarterly projections in our home office. What began as a dull ache in my lower abdomen quickly escalated into something that made me double over, gasping for breath between waves of agony. Lucas found me 20 minutes later, curled on the floor beside my desk, my laptop still displaying the financial spreadsheets I'd been analyzing when the pain struck. "Emergency room now," Lucas said, his voice tight with concern as he helped me to my feet. The drive to Mercy General Hospital passed in a blur of traffic lights, and Lucas's reassuring words that everything would be okay, that it was probably just stress or something we ate. But the pain was unlike anything I'd ever experienced, sharp and relentless, making it impossible to think clearly about anything except the need for relief. The emergency room doctor's examination confirmed our worst fears: acute appendicitis with signs of perforation. Surgery was required immediately to prevent life-threatening complications. As the medical team prepared me for the operating room, I managed to call Maya, my voice weak but urgent. "I need you to watch over things," I told her as Lucas held my hand, his face pale with worry. "The Everdeen account presentation is tomorrow, and the Harrison contract needs final review. Just make sure everything stays on track until I'm back." "Don't worry about any of that." Maya's voice was warm with concern over the phone. "Focus on getting better. Lucas and I will handle everything perfectly. You know you can trust me with anything." Those words, "you can trust me with anything," would replay in my mind countless times over the coming days, as I discovered just how literally Maya had interpreted that statement. The surgery itself was more complicated than expected. What should have been a routine appendectomy became a 3-hour procedure when the surgical team discovered that my appendix had indeed perforated, causing infection to spread throughout my abdominal cavity. Dr. Abigail Everdeen, the lead surgeon, explained to Lucas afterward that I would need an extended recovery period and careful monitoring for complications. The infection was more widespread than we initially realized. Dr. Everdeen told Lucas, her words carrying the weight of someone who had seen similar cases take unexpected turns. "We've cleaned everything thoroughly, but Jenna will need to remain sedated for the next day or two while the antibiotics work. There's also a possibility of temporary cognitive effects from the anesthesia and infection. Some patients experience memory gaps or confusion during the initial recovery period." Maya arrived at the hospital within an hour of my surgery, bringing flowers, comfort food for Lucas, and an efficiency that impressed everyone she encountered. She spoke knowledgeably with the medical staff about my condition, took detailed notes about my care requirements, and somehow managed to coordinate with our office manager about rescheduling client meetings without missing a beat. "She's incredible," I heard one nurse tell another during a shift change. "Most friends would be falling apart, but she's handling everything like a professional. The husband is lucky to have someone so competent helping during such a stressful time." While I drifted in and out of consciousness over the next 2 days, Maya established herself as my primary liaison with the outside world. She fielded calls from concerned clients, managed communication with our employees, and kept Lucas updated on business matters that couldn't wait for my recovery. To everyone watching, she was the perfect friend, capable, caring, and completely trustworthy. But on the 3rd day, when I finally regained full consciousness, I began to notice discrepancies in Maya's updates that sent cold warnings through my still healing body. "The Harrison contract had some last-minute changes," Maya explained to Lucas as they stood beside my bed, believing I was still too groggy to follow their conversation. "Nothing major, just some adjustments to the payment schedule and project management structure. I signed off on them since time was critical, and you were so focused on Jenna's care." I knew the Harrison contract intimately. I had spent weeks negotiating every clause, every timeline, every payment milestone. There were no pending changes, no deadline pressures that would require emergency modifications. Maya was lying, and she was doing it with the same concerned competence that had impressed the hospital staff. "What about the Everdeen presentation?" Lucas asked, running his hand through his hair in the gesture I recognized as his response to overwhelming stress. "Postponed, of course," Maya replied smoothly. I explained Jenna's situation, and they were completely understanding. Though I did mention that if they needed to move forward with a different consultant for timeline reasons, we would certainly understand. These corporate clients can't afford delays, and Jenna's recovery period is still uncertain. My heart rate spiked, and I had to consciously control my breathing to avoid triggering the monitoring equipment. The Everdeen account was our largest prospective client, representing nearly 30% of our projected annual revenue. Suggesting they might need to find alternative consulting services wasn't understanding. It was sabotage. "Should I be worried about the business?" Lucas asked, his voice carrying a vulnerability that made my chest ache. "I don't understand the financial complexities the way Jenna does. What if we lose clients while she's recovering?" That's exactly why you need someone who can step in temporarily, Maya said, her tone becoming more authoritative. Someone who knows the business inside and out, who clients already trust, who can make decisions without causing disruption. I've been thinking we should formalize some arrangements. Temporary power of attorney for business decisions, access to accounts that might need immediate attention, that sort of thing. I don't know. Lucas hesitated. That seems like something Jenna should decide when she's better. Of course, Maya agreed quickly, but I caught the flash of frustration that crossed her face before she composed herself. I'm just thinking ahead. You know how much Jenna worries about the business. If she wakes up to find things in chaos because we couldn't access necessary accounts or make time-sensitive decisions, the stress could actually impede her recovery. The manipulation was masterful in its logic and its emotional appeal to Lucas's protective instincts. Maya was positioning herself not as someone seeking control, but as someone trying to prevent problems that would ultimately hurt me. As visiting hours ended and Maya prepared to leave, she leaned over my bed, her voice soft and caring for Lucas's benefit. Rest easy, Jenna, she whispered, her hand briefly touching mine. I'm taking care of everything you care about. But her eyes held a message that her words didn't convey. Everything I cared about was now hers to control. The fourth day of my recovery marked the beginning of Maya's systematic campaign to isolate me from the business and personal networks I had spent years building. While I maintained the pretense of being heavily sedated, I watched her orchestrate a masterclass in manipulation that was both terrifying and impressive in its calculated precision. Maya arrived that morning carrying a leather portfolio and wearing what I recognized as her serious business outfit, a navy blazer with subtle pinstripes that conveyed authority without being intimidating. She had always understood the psychology of appearance, but now I was seeing that knowledge weaponized against people who trusted her completely. I've been thinking about our conversation yesterday, she told Lucas, settling into the chair that had become her unofficial territory. The temporary business management situation. I spoke with Connor Everdeen from the law firm this morning about the best way to protect Jenna's interests while ensuring business continuity. My blood chilled. Connor Everdeen was our corporate attorney, a meticulous man who had helped us structure our original partnership agreements. If Maya was consulting with him, she was moving far beyond casual suggestions into actual legal territory. What did he recommend? Lucas asked, his voice revealing the exhaustion of someone who had been sleeping in hospital chairs and surviving on vending machine coffee. Well, he explained that in situations like this, where one partner is temporarily incapacitated, the business could face serious complications if decisions need to be made quickly. Client contracts, vendor payments, employee issues. Maya opened her portfolio, retrieving documents that looked official and intimidating. He drafted some temporary authorization forms that would allow me to act on Jenna's behalf for routine business matters until she's fully recovered. I wanted to scream, to sit up and demand to see those documents, but I forced myself to remain still. Connor Everdeen was thorough and ethical. If he had prepared authorization forms, Maya must have presented him with a version of events that made her requests seem reasonable and necessary. Are you sure this is what Jenna would want? Lucas asked, his natural caution warring with his exhaustion and stress. Maya's expression softened with practiced sympathy. Lucas, you know how much Jenna trusts me. I've been handling her financial accounts for years. I know every client relationship, every business process. She would be devastated if the company she built suffered because we couldn't make basic operational decisions. She paused, letting that sink in before delivering her masterstroke. And honestly, trying to burden her with business decisions while she's fighting an infection could actually endanger her health. While they discussed the authorization forms, Maya's phone buzzed constantly with what she described as urgent business matters. Each interruption reinforced her narrative that the company was in crisis without my direct involvement, that decisions were backing up, that clients were becoming concerned. That was Harriet from the Morrison account, Maya said after ending one call, her voice tight with manufactured stress. They're questioning whether we can deliver on schedule given Jenna's condition. I assured them we have contingency plans, but she let the implication hang in the air like a threat. But I knew Harriet Morrison personally. We had worked together for 3 years, and she was the type of client who would extend deadlines rather than abandon a trusted consultant over a medical emergency. Maya was either lying about the call entirely or actively undermining client relationships to create the crisis she claimed to be managing. The most chilling moment came when Dr. Everdeen made her afternoon rounds. Maya intercepted her before she could examine me, engaging in what appeared to be a concerned discussion about my recovery timeline. "How long before we can expect Jenna to be making complex decisions again?" Maya asked, her voice carefully modulated between professional interest and personal concern. "Her husband and I are trying to manage some time-sensitive business matters, and we want to be realistic about when she'll be able to resume her normal responsibilities." "Recovery timelines vary significantly," Dr. Everdeen replied professionally. "The infection was serious, and some patients experience cognitive effects for weeks or even months after this type of surgery. Memory issues, difficulty concentrating, problems with complex reasoning, these are all normal during the healing process." I watched Maya absorb this information with what looked like concern but felt like strategic planning. She was gathering ammunition for her narrative that I would be incapacitated far longer than necessary, unable to challenge whatever arrangements she was putting in place. "Of course, we want her to focus entirely on healing," Maya said. "No stress, no complicated decisions, just rest and recovery. We'll handle everything else." That afternoon, Lucas signed the temporary authorization forms. I watched him do it, pen trembling slightly in his exhausted hands, believing he was protecting me and our business from complications that Maya had expertly manufactured. As visiting hours ended, Maya approached my bedside for her nightly ritual of fake concern, but this time her whispered words carried a different edge. "Sweet dreams, Jenna. Tomorrow we start making some real changes. Changes that should have happened a long time ago." Her smile was soft and caring for Lucas's benefit, but her eyes held a coldness I had never seen before. Maya Roman was no longer pretending, at least not to me. The mask was slipping, and underneath was someone I didn't recognize at all. The revelation that changed everything came through the most unexpected source. My night nurse, a sharp-eyed woman named Harriet Reed, who had been working at Mercy General for over 20 years. During her midnight rounds on my 5th night in the hospital, she noticed something that everyone else had missed. I was awake and alert far more often than my chart indicated. "You've been listening, haven't you?" Harriet whispered, as she checked my IV line, her voice so quiet it was barely audible above the hum of medical equipment. "I've seen that look before, patients who need to appear sicker than they are for their own protection." I made the split-second decision to trust her, offering the slightest nod that confirmed her suspicion. Harriet's expression didn't change, but she continued her routine care while speaking in the same low whisper. "Your friend has been asking very specific questions about cognitive recovery timelines and legal capacity. Questions that experienced medical professionals ask, not worried friends." She adjusted my blanket, her movements casual and professional. "If you need help, blink twice. If you need someone contacted, blink 3 times. 3 deliberate blinks, and Harriet Reed became my first ally in what I was beginning to understand was a carefully orchestrated betrayal that went far deeper than I had initially realized. "Who?" she mouthed silently. I couldn't speak the name without alerting the monitoring equipment to my consciousness, but I managed to whisper a single word. "Harrison." David Harrison had been my business law professor in college and had remained a mentor throughout my career. More importantly, he was now a partner at Harrison & Associates, a law firm that specialized in corporate fraud and fiduciary misconduct. If anyone could help me understand the legal implications of what Maya was doing, it would be David. Harriet nodded, almost imperceptibly. "I'll find a way to contact him discreetly. For now, keep pretending. Document everything you can remember, dates, times, exact conversations. You're going to need details." Over the next 2 days, while maintaining my unconscious act, I began mentally cataloging every suspicious interaction I had witnessed. Maya's conversations with Lucas about business decisions, her unauthorized contact with our attorney, her manipulation of client relationships, and most disturbingly, her discussions with unknown parties during phone calls she thought I couldn't hear. The pattern that emerged was sophisticated and methodical. Maya wasn't simply taking advantage of an opportunity. She had been laying groundwork for months, possibly years, to position herself as indispensable to both my personal and professional life. The medical crisis had simply accelerated a timeline that was already in motion. David Harrison's response came through Harriet the following evening. He couldn't visit directly without raising suspicions, but he had sent a message that made my blood run cold. Legal documents filed yesterday. Power of attorney, business management authorization, medical proxy. All appear legitimate but require immediate review. Maintain status quo until we can assess full scope. Maya had moved faster than I had imagined possible. While I lay in this hospital bed, she had already begun the legal process of assuming control over my life. The temporary authorization forms Lucas had signed were apparently just the beginning of a much more comprehensive plan, but David's message also contained hope. Countermeasures available. Trust structures, protected assets, alternative documentation. Need 24 to 48 hours to prepare. Stay alert, stay safe. That night, I forced myself to remain completely still, as Maya made another of her whispered phone calls from the chair beside my bed. This conversation was different, more detailed, more confident, more revealing about the true scope of her intentions. "The medical proxy is in place," she said quietly, her voice carrying a satisfaction that made my skin crawl. "Yes, cognitive impairment concerns. The doctors confirmed possible long-term effects, which gives us plenty of justification for extended management of her affairs." She paused, listening. "Lucas is completely dependent on my guidance now. He's overwhelmed and grateful for the help. He'll sign whatever I present as necessary for Jenna's protection." I heard papers rustling as Maya reviewed documents in the dim light of the hospital room. The business transfer protocols are ready for the next phase. Client relationships are already being redirected through me as the primary contact. The transition will appear completely natural, a temporary arrangement that becomes permanent due to medical necessity. The call revealed something that chilled me to the bone. Maya wasn't working alone. Someone else was providing legal guidance, strategic planning, and what sounded like financial backing for this elaborate scheme. This wasn't a crime of opportunity. It was a calculated corporate takeover disguised as concerned friendship. As Maya ended her call and settled back into her vigil beside my bed, I realized that my situation was far more dangerous than a simple betrayal. I was caught in a web of manipulation that had been years in the making, and Maya's next move would likely be to ensure that my cognitive impairment became permanent enough to justify her continued control. But Maya had made one critical error. She had underestimated both my awareness and my ability to plan ahead. David Harrison wasn't just my former professor. He was also the attorney who had helped me establish certain protective measures years ago, safeguards that Maya didn't even know existed. The student was about to get a very painful lesson from the teacher. What Maya didn't know, what nobody except David Harrison and I knew, was that 3 years ago I had established a comprehensive protective framework that could be activated in exactly this type of scenario. The inspiration had come from a corporate fraud case David had shared during one of our quarterly mentor lunches, a story about a business owner whose trusted partner had systematically stolen everything while the owner recovered from a stroke. "The most dangerous threats come from the people closest to us," David had said that day, his expression grave, as he described how the victim had lost everything because they never imagined their partner could betray them. Trust is essential for business relationships, but blind trust is a luxury that successful people can't afford. That conversation had haunted me for weeks, leading to late-night discussions with Lucas about protecting what we had built together. We had agreed that while we trusted Maya completely, wisdom demanded safeguards that didn't depend on anyone's good intentions. The framework we established was elegant in its simplicity and devastating in its effectiveness. Every major asset, every critical business component, every valuable relationship was protected by what David called dead man switches, automated protections that would activate if certain conditions were met. The primary mechanism was a sophisticated trust structure that held controlling interests in our most valuable assets. Unlike traditional trusts that required active management, this system was designed to respond automatically to specific trigger events: prolonged medical incapacitation, unauthorized access to protected accounts, or attempts to transfer business ownership without proper authorization from both Lucas and me. Maya's power of attorney forms, legitimate as they appeared, would grant her access only to carefully isolated accounts containing enough funds to handle routine operations, but nowhere near enough to damage our core business. The real assets, our client contracts, intellectual property, investment accounts, and business ownership, were protected by legal structures she didn't even know existed. More importantly, every attempt to access protected assets would automatically trigger notification protocols. David's law firm monitored these accounts through automated systems that would alert them immediately if anyone tried to exceed authorized access levels. Maya's activities over the past few days had already generated a detailed electronic trail that would be admissible in court. But the most sophisticated element of our protection plan was something I called the competency insurance protocol. Anticipating that any serious threat might involve claims about my mental capacity or ability to make decisions, David had helped me establish a system of independent verification that could instantly refute such claims. Dr. Connor Hayden, a neuropsychologist who specialized in cognitive assessment, had worked with us to create detailed baseline cognitive evaluations that were updated annually and stored with an independent medical facility. If anyone questioned my mental capacity, these evaluations could be compared to current testing to provide objective evidence of my cognitive state. Additionally, we had established a network of professional contacts who could verify my competency through structured interactions. These weren't friends who might be dismissed as biased. They were business associates, medical professionals, and legal experts who had ongoing relationships with me and could testify to my mental acuity. As I lay in that hospital bed, listening to Maya orchestrate what she believed was the perfect crime, I knew that every move she made was actually tightening a legal noose around her own neck. The temporary authorization forms she had convinced Lucas to sign were worthless for accessing anything valuable. The business decisions she was making exceeded her actual authority and created grounds for fraud charges. The client relationships she was attempting to redirect were protected by contracts that prohibited such transfers without my explicit consent. Most critically, her conversations with unknown conspirators were being recorded by the very monitoring systems she thought she was circumventing. David's firm had installed discrete recording equipment in our business offices months ago, activated by keywords related to unauthorized access or business transfers. Maya's phone calls from the hospital were also being captured by a system that monitored communications from our business phones, which she had been using to maintain the appearance of legitimacy. The irony was perfect. Maya's efficiency and attention to detail, the qualities that had made her such an effective accountant, were creating a comprehensive record of her criminal activity. Every forged signature, every unauthorized transaction, every false statement to clients was being documented by systems she had helped us implement for entirely different purposes. But perhaps the most devastating element of our protection plan was one that wouldn't become apparent until Maya attempted her final moves. The business partnerships she was trying to control included specific clauses that would automatically dissolve if either Lucas or I were found to be under undue influence or coercion. These clauses would not only protect our assets, but would also trigger immediate legal reviews of all recent business transactions. Maya thought she was stealing a successful consulting firm. What she was actually stealing was an elaborate legal trap that would snap shut the moment she tried to claim her prizes. As Harriet Reed made her midnight rounds, she slipped me a small note from David. All systems active. Continue performance. Justice is 48 hours away. I closed my eyes, allowing myself the first moment of genuine peace I had felt since discovering Maya's betrayal. The student was about to learn that her teacher had been preparing for this lesson all along. By the 7th day of my hospital stay, Maya's confidence had evolved into something approaching arrogance. She moved through the medical facility like someone who owned it, speaking authoritatively with staff members, making decisions about my care without consultation, and treating Lucas more like a junior partner than my husband. Her transformation was so complete that I began to wonder if the caring friend I had known for 15 years had ever really existed at all. The morning brought Maya's most audacious move yet. She arrived with a briefcase full of documents and a man I didn't recognize. a tall, silver-haired individual in an expensive suit who introduced himself to Lucas as Louis Everdeen, a specialist in, quote, business continuity planning during medical crises. Given the uncertainty around Jenna's recovery timeline, Louis explained to Lucas with the practiced smoothness of someone who made his living from other people's vulnerabilities, Maya and I have developed a comprehensive plan to ensure your business not only survives, but thrives during this difficult period. I watched through barely open eyes as Louis spread documents across the rolling table they had positioned near my bed. The papers looked official, complete with corporate letterheads and legal language that would intimidate anyone without extensive business experience. Maya sat beside Lucas, occasionally touching his arm in gestures of support while she explained each document's necessity. This consulting agreement formalizes my temporary management role, Maya said, pointing to a thick contract. It protects both you and Jenna by establishing clear authority structures and accountability measures. If clients or vendors question decision-making during Jenna's absence, this provides legal backing for all business operations. Lucas studied the documents with the concentration of someone trying to understand concepts outside his expertise. His background in organizational psychology had prepared him to analyze workplace dynamics and human behavior, but not to navigate complex business law designed to deceive. The compensation structure seems substantial, Lucas observed, his finger tracing a section of the contract that apparently outlined Maya's temporary management fees. Market rate for crisis management consulting, Louis interjected smoothly. Maya's taking on enormous responsibility and liability. The fee structure reflects both the scope of work and the risk she's assuming on Jenna's behalf. What they were describing as temporary management was actually a comprehensive transfer of business control, with compensation that would drain our operating capital within months. The consulting agreement included provisions for Maya to restructure client contracts, negotiate new partnerships, and make strategic decisions that could fundamentally alter our business model. But Maya's most calculated move came when she addressed my medical situation directly. I've been consulting with Dr. Everdeen about Jenna's cognitive recovery, Maya told Lucas, her voice carrying exactly the right combination of concern and clinical detachment. The infection was more severe than initially diagnosed, and there may be lasting effects on her decision-making capacity. Dr. Everdeen mentioned that some patients never fully recover their previous level of cognitive function. I had to fight to control my breathing as Maya painted a picture of permanent brain damage that would justify her continued control indefinitely. Lucas's face went pale as he absorbed the implications of what she was suggesting. Are you saying she might not be able to run the business again? Lucas asked, his voice breaking slightly on the words. We have to be realistic, Louis said gently, stepping in with practiced empathy. Even if Jenna makes a full physical recovery, complex business decisions might be beyond her capacity for months or even years. The responsible thing is to establish management structures that don't depend on her cognitive abilities returning to previous levels. Through the monitoring equipment, I could hear my heart rate accelerating with rage, but the sedatives Maya had convinced the medical staff to administer were keeping my external responses muted. She had somehow gained influence over my medical care, ensuring that I remained artificially groggy and unresponsive even as my natural recovery progressed. The final document Louis presented was the most chilling, a medical power of attorney that would give Maya authority to make healthcare decisions on my behalf if my cognitive impairment was deemed significant enough to compromise my judgment. This is just a precaution, Maya assured Lucas as she guided his hand toward the signature line. If Jenna's cognitive function returns completely, we can dissolve all these arrangements immediately. But if the doctor's concerns prove accurate, these documents ensure someone who understands her wishes can advocate for her care. As Lucas hesitated, Maya played her final card. She pulled out her phone and showed him what appeared to be a series of concerning text messages. These are from 3 of our biggest clients, Maya said, her voice heavy with manufactured regret. They're questioning whether we can fulfill our contracts given the uncertainty around Jenna's condition. If we don't demonstrate stable leadership soon, we could lose everything she worked to build. I recognized the manipulation immediately. Maya was creating urgency through manufactured crises, forcing Lucas to make decisions under pressure while isolated from independent advice. But what she didn't know was that our automated monitoring systems had already flagged her unauthorized client communications as potential fraud. As Lucas reached for the pen to sign what he believed were protective measures, I knew that Maya's web of deception was about to trigger the very safeguards she was trying to circumvent. Every signature, every false claim, every fraudulent authorization was being recorded by systems that would soon expose her elaborate scheme. The trap was almost ready to spring. The morning of my 8th day in the hospital brought a development that transformed my situation from dangerous to potentially life-threatening. Dr. Everdeen arrived for her routine rounds with an expression that immediately set off alarm bells, even through my medicated haze. Her usually confident demeanor was replaced by something that looked disturbingly like confusion mixed with concern. "I need to discuss some irregularities in Jenna's treatment plan," Dr. Everdeen said to Lucas, her voice carrying the careful tone medical professionals use when delivering unwelcome news. "There have been some modifications to her medication regimen that weren't authorized through proper channels." Maya, who had been reviewing documents at her usual station beside my bed, looked up with an expression of concerned surprise that would have been convincing if I hadn't spent the past week watching her performances. "What kind of modifications?" Lucas asked, his voice tight with renewed anxiety. "Additional sedatives, primarily. Medications that are extending her recovery time and keeping her cognitive function suppressed well beyond what we would expect at this stage of healing." Dr. Everdeen consulted her tablet, scrolling through what appeared to be a detailed medication history. These orders came through with what appeared to be family requests for, quote, comfort and rest, but they're inconsistent with optimal recovery protocols. The room fell silent except for the steady beeping of my monitors. I could feel the tension building as Lucas processed this information, his protective instincts warring with his exhaustion and confusion. "I don't understand," Lucas said slowly. "Who would have requested changes to her medication? I certainly didn't authorize anything beyond what was medically necessary." Maya's response was a masterclass in deflection and manufactured emotion. Her eyes filled with tears as she reached for Lucas's hand, her voice trembling with what appeared to be genuine distress. "I may have. I was so worried about Jenna's pain levels, her agitation during the night when the infections were worst. I spoke with one of the nurses about whether there was anything that could help her rest more comfortably." She paused, allowing her voice to break slightly. "If I overstepped, if I somehow caused her recovery to be delayed, I'll never forgive myself." But Dr. Everdeen wasn't satisfied with Maya's explanation. Her medical training had taught her to recognize inconsistencies, and something about the medication modifications had clearly raised serious concerns. "The issue isn't just about comfort medication," Dr. Everdeen continued, her tone becoming more clinical and direct. "Some of the drugs added to Jenna's regimen can cause temporary cognitive impairment that mimics brain damage. If someone was deliberately trying to create the appearance of lasting neurological damage, this would be exactly the pharmaceutical approach they might use." The accusation hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Maya's tearful performance shifted almost imperceptibly, her grief transforming into defensive indignation. "Are you suggesting that I would deliberately harm my best friend?" Maya's voice rose with perfectly calibrated outrage. "Dr. Everdeen, I've been here every day, caring for Jenna, managing her business affairs, supporting her husband through the most difficult period of their lives. The idea that I would somehow sabotage her recovery is not only insulting, it's completely absurd." Lucas looked between Maya and Dr. Everdeen, his confusion evident as he tried to process accusations that challenged everything he believed about the woman who had been his rock during this crisis. "There has to be some mistake," Lucas said, his voice pleading for a simpler explanation. "Maya has been incredible throughout this entire ordeal. She's sacrificed her own business interests to help manage ours. She's been more like family than a friend." Dr. Everdeen's expression softened slightly as she recognized Lucas's emotional state, but her medical concerns remained paramount. "I'm not making accusations," she said carefully. "I'm simply noting that Jenna's medication profile includes drugs that weren't medically indicated and that are known to suppress cognitive function. Given that there are significant business and financial decisions being made based on assumptions about her mental capacity, I felt obligated to bring these irregularities to your attention." Maya's response revealed the first crack in her carefully maintained facade. Instead of continued emotional appeals, she shifted to a more aggressive strategy that suggested someone who felt cornered. "Dr. Everdeen, I understand you're trying to be thorough, but your implications are creating unnecessary stress during an already traumatic situation. Perhaps it would be better to focus on Jenna's current treatment, rather than questioning the motivations of people who've been advocating for her care." The shift in Maya's tone was subtle, but unmistakable. She was no longer the grateful friend seeking guidance. She was someone asserting authority and pushing back against unwelcome scrutiny. Dr. Everdeen noticed the change immediately. Her expression hardened as she recognized the transformation in Maya's demeanor. The emergence of someone who felt entitled to control medical decisions for a patient who wasn't her family member. "I think we need to have a more comprehensive discussion about Jenna's care team and decision-making protocols," Dr. Everdeen said, her voice taking on the firmness of someone who had identified a potential threat to her patient's welfare. But Maya had already begun her retreat, gathering her documents and preparing what looked suspiciously like an exit strategy. "Of course," Maya said, her voice returning to its practiced sweetness. "Jenna's recovery is all that matters to any of us." Yet her eyes held a coldness that suggested she was already planning her next move in what had become a much more dangerous game. Dr. Everdeen's intervention became the catalyst for my genuine recovery to begin. Within hours of her discovery of the unauthorized medications, she had ordered a complete review of my pharmaceutical regimen and began the process of safely reducing the sedatives that had been keeping me artificially suppressed. For the first time in over a week, I could feel my natural cognitive clarity returning, like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. "The improvement in her neurological responses is remarkable," Dr. Everdeen explained to Lucas during her evening rounds, her voice carrying the satisfaction of a physician who had identified and corrected a serious problem. "Within 24 hours, we should see significant increases in her alertness and cognitive function. The medications that were suppressing her recovery are clearing her system much faster than expected." Lucas sat beside my bed, holding my hand with a gentleness that made my heart ache. I could see the toll the past week had taken on him, the dark circles under his eyes, the tension in his shoulders, the way he seemed to second-guess every decision. Maya's manipulation hadn't just targeted me. She had systematically undermined his confidence and isolated him from his natural support systems. "Will there be any lasting effects?" Lucas asked, his voice carrying fears that had clearly been building for days. "From the infections, the surgery complications, whatever was happening with her medications. Based on her current responses, I expect a full recovery," Dr. Everdeen assured him. Jenna's cognitive baseline was exceptionally high to begin with, and there's no evidence of any actual neurological damage. The confusion and delayed responses of the past few days appear to have been entirely pharmaceutical in nature. What Dr. Everdeen couldn't see, but what I was beginning to understand with increasing clarity, was the full scope of damage that Maya had inflicted during my period of vulnerability. As my natural awareness returned, I began to piece together fragments of conversations I had overheard, phone calls I had witnessed, and decisions that had been made in my name while I was unable to respond. The business implications alone were staggering. Maya had used my incapacitation to contact every major client, ostensibly to inform them of my condition, but actually to plant seeds of doubt about my ability to fulfill our contracted obligations. She had rescheduled critical meetings, delayed important deliverables, and created an atmosphere of uncertainty that could take months to repair. More disturbing were the legal documents she had convinced Lucas to sign. The temporary power of attorney was just the beginning. There were consulting agreements that gave her unprecedented control over business operations, medical proxy forms that granted her authority over my healthcare decisions, and what appeared to be preliminary paperwork for more permanent arrangements that would have been devastating if implemented. But perhaps the most insidious aspect of Maya's campaign was how she had isolated Lucas from our normal support networks. She had convinced him that business associates shouldn't be burdened with personal medical details, that family members would be too emotional to help with practical decisions, and that professional advisors like David Harrison were too expensive to consult during a temporary crisis. Maya had systematically dismantled every relationship that might have provided Lucas with independent perspective or advice, leaving him dependent on her guidance for decisions he felt unqualified to make alone. It was a masterclass in psychological manipulation that had transformed my capable, intelligent husband into someone who doubted his own judgment on every matter related to our life together. The financial damage was harder to assess but clearly significant. Maya had been making business decisions with apparent authority, authorizing expenditures that exceeded her legitimate access levels, and redirecting client payments through accounts she controlled. The temporary management fees outlined in her consulting agreement would have drained our operating capital within months, leaving us financially vulnerable even if I made a complete recovery. Most chilling was the realization that Maya's plan had been designed with multiple exit strategies. If I recovered quickly and challenged her actions, she could claim that everything was done with the best intentions during a medical crisis. If I suffered lasting cognitive impairment, whether natural or pharmaceutically induced, she could maintain control indefinitely while appearing to be the devoted friend who had sacrificed her own interests to care for me. The sophistication of her scheme suggested months or even years of preparation. Maya hadn't simply taken advantage of an unexpected opportunity. She had been positioning herself for exactly this scenario, building trust and access, while carefully studying our vulnerabilities and preparing to exploit them. As evening settled over the hospital, Lucas finally allowed himself to believe that I was genuinely improving. He squeezed my hand gently, his voice thick with emotion as he spoke to what he thought was my unconscious form. "I'm so sorry, Jenna. I tried to protect everything you built, but I was so scared of making the wrong decisions. Maya seemed to know exactly what to do, and I trusted her completely." His voice broke slightly. "I hope I didn't ruin everything while you were fighting to get better." I wanted desperately to reassure him, to tell him that his trust hadn't been misplaced but manipulated, that Maya's betrayal was calculated and sophisticated, rather than an obvious threat he should have recognized. But I also knew that revealing my awareness prematurely could be dangerous if Maya still had allies or access that could threaten my recovery. Tomorrow, Dr. Everdeen had promised I would be alert enough for complex conversations. Tomorrow, I could begin the process of reclaiming my life and exposing the full extent of Maya's betrayal. Tonight, I would plan exactly how to destroy her. My awakening the next morning was carefully orchestrated theater. Dr. Everdeen had coached me on how to simulate the gradual return of consciousness in a way that would appear medically authentic, while allowing me to assess my situation without immediately revealing the full extent of my awareness. Lucas was present, as was Maya, who had arrived early with her usual portfolio of documents and concerned expressions. "Jenna?" Lucas's voice was soft and hopeful as he noticed my eyes fluttering open with apparent confusion. "Can you hear me? You're in the hospital, but you're going to be okay." I allowed my gaze to drift slowly around the room, taking in the medical equipment, the flowers Maya had brought, and finally focusing on Lucas, with what I hoped appeared to be genuine recognition emerging through mental fog. "Lucas?" My voice was deliberately weak and uncertain. What happened? I remember pain, and then everything is so unclear." Maya leaned forward from her chair, her performance of relieved concern so convincing that I almost admired her dedication to the role. "Oh, Jenna, thank God. You've been so sick. Emergency surgery for appendicitis, complications from infection. You've been unconscious for over a week." I let confusion cloud my expression as I processed this information, deliberately showing the kind of cognitive uncertainty that would be expected after prolonged sedation. A week? But what about the Harrison contract? The Everdeen presentation? The business? "Don't worry about any of that," Maya said quickly, moving closer to my bedside. "I've been handling everything. All the clients understand about your medical situation, and I've kept all the important projects moving forward. You just need to focus on getting better." Lucas took my hand, his relief at my apparent recovery evident in every gesture. "Maya has been incredible, Jenna. I don't know what we would have done without her. She's managed everything, the business, your medical care, all the decisions that couldn't wait." I allowed my eyes to drift to Maya's hands as she reached for a water cup, noting with carefully controlled anger that she was still wearing my grandmother's wedding ring. The sight of it on her finger sent a surge of rage through me that I had to consciously suppress to maintain my performance. "My ring," I said with apparent confusion, looking down at my bare left hand. "Where is my wedding ring?" Maya's response was smooth and practiced. "The medical staff removed all your jewelry before surgery for safety. Don't worry. Everything is being kept secure." When you're feeling stronger, we'll make sure you get everything back. But I caught the slight tightening around her eyes, the almost imperceptible pause before she answered. Maya was lying about the ring's location, and now I knew she was fully committed to her deception rather than simply taking advantage of circumstances. Dr. Everdeen arrived for her morning rounds, and I played my part perfectly, confused about recent events but clearly improving, asking basic questions about my condition, while appearing unable to focus on complex information for extended periods. Her cognitive function is returning nicely, Dr. Everdeen told Lucas and Maya, though I caught her giving Maya a particularly sharp look. We'll want to monitor her closely over the next few days, but I expect continued improvement. However, complex decision-making may be challenging for some time, as her brain fully recovers from the medication effects. Maya absorbed this information with what appeared to be concern but felt like strategic planning. Of course, we wouldn't want to burden her with business decisions until she's completely recovered. I'll continue managing the urgent matters that can't wait. Actually, Dr. Everdeen said with careful authority, now that Jenna is conscious, any major decisions about her care or personal affairs should involve her directly, even if she needs additional support to process complex information. It's important for recovery that patients maintain as much autonomy as their condition allows. I watched Maya's face carefully as Dr. Everdeen established this boundary. The flash of frustration that crossed her features was quickly masked, but not before I saw the anger of someone whose authority was being challenged. Of course, Maya agreed smoothly, though I hope Jenna understands that some time-sensitive business matters have required immediate attention. The consulting arrangements we established were purely to protect her interests during the crisis. This was the opening I had been waiting for. With carefully modulated confusion, I asked, "Consulting arrangements? I don't remember. What kind of arrangements?" Lucas began explaining the temporary power of attorney on business management agreements, his words revealing the full scope of what Maya had convinced him to authorize. As he spoke, I maintained an expression of growing concern and bewilderment. "That seems like a lot of responsibility for you to take on," I said to Maya, my voice carrying the uncertainty of someone trying to process complex information through mental fog. "Are you sure that's what I would have wanted?" Maya's smile remained perfectly calibrated, but I detected the underlying tension of someone whose carefully constructed narrative was beginning to face scrutiny. "It's exactly what any best friend would do," she replied, "protecting what matters most to you until you're strong enough to handle it yourself." But her eyes held a different message. She had invested too much in this scheme to allow my recovery to derail her plans. The real battle was about to begin. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Connor Reed, our office manager, who arrived at the hospital that afternoon, carrying a laptop bag and wearing an expression that mixed professional concern with barely contained anger. Lucas had mentioned him to Maya as someone who might need to discuss operational matters, but what Maya didn't know was that Connor had been David Harrison's recommendation when we first hired him 2 years ago. "I hope you don't mind the intrusion," Connor said as he entered my room, his eyes quickly assessing the dynamic between Lucas, Maya, and me. "There are some urgent matters that require Jenna's input, even if she's not feeling completely herself yet." Maya immediately moved to intercept this potential disruption to her narrative. "Connor, I appreciate your concern, but Jenna is still recovering from serious complications. Dr. Everdeen has advised limiting complex business discussions until her cognitive function returns to normal." But Connor had clearly prepared for this resistance. "Actually, these matters specifically require Mrs. Hayden's personal authorization because they involve access to protected accounts that were established outside of normal business operations. The bank is requesting her direct verification for certain transactions that have been flagged as unusual." I watched Maya's face carefully as Connor delivered this information. Her confident expression wavered slightly, the first sign that she was encountering systems she hadn't anticipated or couldn't control. "What kind of transactions?" Lucas asked, his business instincts beginning to override his exhaustion and emotional vulnerability. Connor opened his laptop and turned the screen toward us, displaying what appeared to be a detailed banking interface with multiple account summaries. "There have been several large transfers and authorization requests over the past week. Some of them exceed the limits established for routine business operations." As Connor walked us through the financial activity, a clear pattern emerged, that painted Maya's actions in an increasingly damning light. She had attempted to access accounts that were far beyond her legitimate authority, had authorized expenditures that exceeded approved limits, and had tried to redirect client payments through systems that required my personal verification. "I don't understand," Maya said, her voice carrying the first notes of defensiveness I had heard since my supposed awakening. "These are all standard business operations that fall under the temporary management authority Lucas and I established for Jenna's protection." Connor's expression remained professionally neutral, but his words carried unmistakable implications. "The problem is that many of these accounts are protected by automated security systems that flag unauthorized access attempts. Mrs. Hayden established these protections specifically to prevent exactly this type of activity." I allowed confusion to cloud my expression as I processed this information, playing the role of someone trying to understand complex financial concepts through the fog of recovery. "Protected accounts? I'm sorry, I'm having trouble remembering. What protections?" "You established them about 3 years ago," Connor explained gently, pulling up additional screens that showed the architecture of the security systems David Harrison and I had implemented. Trust structures, automated monitoring, verification protocols, very sophisticated safeguards designed to protect your assets if you were ever unable to manage them personally. The blood drained from Maya's face as she realized the implications of what Connor was revealing. The temporary authority she thought she had gained was largely illusory. Real control over our valuable assets required verification systems she couldn't access or circumvent. Lucas leaned forward, his analytical mind beginning to process the discrepancies between what Maya had told him and what Connor was demonstrating. "Are you saying that the management arrangements Maya and I set up don't actually give her access to the accounts she needs to run the business?" "That's exactly what I'm saying," Connor confirmed. "The temporary power of attorney covers routine operational expenses and basic account access, but anything significant triggers automatic security protocols that require Mrs. Hayden's personal verification." I watched Maya struggle to maintain her composure as her carefully constructed scheme began to unravel. She had spent weeks positioning herself as indispensable, convincing Lucas that she could seamlessly manage our business operations, only to discover that the most valuable assets were protected by systems she couldn't penetrate. This is a nightmare," Maya said, her voice taking on a note of genuine panic. "Jenna, when you established these protections, did you consider what would happen if you were genuinely incapacitated? What if your recovery takes months? The business could collapse while we wait for security systems to accept your authorization." But Connor had anticipated this argument as well. "Actually, the systems include provisions for exactly that scenario. There are established protocols for cognitive assessment, independent verification of decision-making capacity, and temporary authorization procedures that protect both Mrs. Hayden's interests and business continuity." "What kind of protocols?" Lucas asked, his question revealing growing suspicion about why Maya hadn't mentioned any of these protective measures during their previous discussions. Connor pulled up another screen that displayed a comprehensive framework David Harrison and I had established years ago. Independent medical evaluation, cognitive assessment by qualified specialists, verification by trusted professional contacts, and review by a designated oversight committee. It's designed to distinguish between temporary incapacitation and genuine long-term impairment. Maya's expression had shifted from concern to something approaching desperation. "This is incredibly complicated. Surely there must be simpler ways to handle temporary business management during medical crises." "Not when the assets involved are substantial enough to attract fraud," Connor replied with devastating directness. "These protections exist specifically because Mrs. Hayden understood that serious wealth requires serious security measures." As the full scope of the protective systems became clear, I saw Maya realize that her elaborate scheme had been designed to steal assets she could never actually access. Every document she had convinced Lucas to sign, every authorization she had obtained, every plan she had made was worthless against protections she never knew existed. The trap had been waiting for 3 years, and Maya had walked directly into it. The revelation that shattered any remaining illusions about Maya's motivations came through Connor's laptop in the form of communication logs that our automated security systems had been recording for weeks. As he scrolled through encrypted email threads and phone records, the true scope of Maya's betrayal emerged like a cancer being exposed under surgical lights. The security protocols don't just protect against unauthorized access, Connor explained, his voice taking on the gravity of someone delivering devastating news. They also monitor and record all communication attempts related to protected accounts. What we've discovered is extensive. Maya had gone very still in her chair, her usual animated concern replaced by the rigid posture of someone who understood they were about to be exposed. Lucas watched the screen with growing alarm as Connor revealed communication patterns that painted a picture far more sinister than opportunistic betrayal. Maya, these emails show you've been in contact with Harrison Financial Services for over 6 months, Connor said, highlighting a series of encrypted messages. They're not just casual inquiries. These are detailed discussions about asset valuation, business acquisition strategies, and what appears to be a systematic plan to gain control of Hayden Reed Strategic Solutions. The name Harrison Financial Services sent ice through my veins. I knew them by reputation, a predatory investment firm that specialized in acquiring distressed businesses at below-market values, often by creating the very distress that justified their low offers. I was researching options for business expansion, Maya said, her voice lacking its usual confidence. With Jenna's workload increasing, I thought it might be helpful to explore strategic partnerships that could provide additional resources. But Connor was already displaying evidence that demolished this explanation. The communications began 8 months ago, well before any discussion of expansion. And they specifically focus on scenarios where one partner becomes incapacitated or unable to continue business operations. Lucas's face had gone pale as he absorbed the implications. Are you saying Maya was planning for something to happen to Jenna? That this wasn't just taking advantage of an unexpected crisis? The pattern suggests extensive preparation, Connor confirmed grimly. There are detailed discussions about creating management voids, establishing alternative authority structures, and implementing what Harrison Financial calls transition protocols for businesses with vulnerable partnership arrangements. Maya's composure finally cracked completely. This is insane. You're making it sound like I planned for Jenna to get sick, like I somehow caused her appendicitis. That's not just ridiculous, it's impossible. But Connor wasn't finished revealing the scope of the conspiracy. He pulled up another set of records that showed financial transfers between Maya and Harrison Financial Services, dating back nearly a year. These payments, Connor said, highlighting a series of transactions, appear to be consulting fees paid to Maya Roman for what Harrison Financial describes as, quote, business intelligence and relationship management services. The amounts total over $200,000. The room fell silent except for the steady rhythm of my medical monitors. Maya had been receiving payments from a predatory investment firm for almost a year, providing them with inside information about our business operations, our financial status, our vulnerabilities, and our personal circumstances. Maya, Lucas said, his voice barely above a whisper, you've been selling information about our business? About Jenna? About our marriage? Maya's response revealed the depth of her transformation from friend to enemy. Instead of denial or remorse, she displayed a cold calculation that suggested this moment of exposure had always been a possibility she had prepared for. You have no idea how much work I've put into your success, Maya said, her voice taking on a bitter edge I had never heard before. 15 years of managing your finances, organizing your lives, solving your problems, making you look competent to clients who would have seen through your limitations in minutes without my intervention. The venom in her words was shocking, but more disturbing was the sense that this was Maya's true voice, the thoughts and resentments she had been harboring beneath years of performed friendship. Harrison Financial offered me an opportunity to receive fair compensation for value I'd been providing for free, Maya continued, standing now and abandoning any pretense of concern for my welfare. They recognized what you never did, that I was the real architect of your business success. Connor continued working on his laptop, and I could see additional records appearing on screen that painted an even more damaging picture. The communications also include detailed personal information about both Mr. and Mrs. Hayden, medical history, travel schedules, daily routines, Security arrangements. Maya has been providing Harrison Financial with comprehensive intelligence about your private lives. Lucas stared at Maya, as if seeing her for the first time. You've been spying on us for a year, selling information about our marriage, our health, our business, everything. I've been documenting reality, Maya replied coldly. The reality that Jenna Reed built her success on my foundation, that your consulting firm exists because of my financial management and client relationship skills. That neither of you has ever truly appreciated what I contributed to your comfortable lives. The mask had come off completely. Maya Roman, the grateful friend I had helped through college, the loyal business partner who had stood beside me for 15 years, had revealed herself as someone consumed by resentment and greed, willing to destroy everything I cared about for money and a twisted sense of recognition. But what Maya still didn't understand was that every word she had just spoken was being recorded by the same security systems that had captured her communications with Harrison Financial Services. She had just provided a complete confession that would destroy her life as thoroughly as she had tried to destroy mine. Maya's confession had been exactly what David Harrison and I needed to trigger the final phase of our protection protocols. What she didn't realize was that her emotional outburst had just activated a comprehensive surveillance network that would capture every move she made over the next 24 hours. Connor's laptop wasn't just displaying evidence, it was transmitting everything happening in my hospital room directly to law enforcement and regulatory authorities. I think we all need to take a step back, Maya said, apparently recognizing that her mask-off moment had been strategically disastrous. She attempted to return to her concerned friend persona, but the performance felt hollow after her bitter revelation of resentment. This has been incredibly stressful for everyone, and I think emotions are running higher than they should. Lucas remained silent, staring at Maya with the expression of someone who was mentally reviewing years of interactions through an entirely new lens. I could see him connecting dots that had previously seemed unrelated. Maya's presence at every important moment, her knowledge of our most private affairs, her insistence on being involved in every major decision. Connor continued working on his laptop with the methodical precision of someone executing a carefully planned operation. Actually, Maya, there are a few more things we need to discuss before anyone leaves. The security systems have flagged some additional activities that require immediate attention. I watched Maya's face as Connor spoke, noting the way her eyes darted toward the door as if calculating escape routes. Her confident manipulation of the past week was crumbling, replaced by the desperation of someone who realized their elaborate scheme was collapsing. What kind of activities? Maya asked, her voice tight with barely controlled anxiety. Connor turned his laptop screen to display what appeared to be real-time monitoring data. Your phone has been quite active over the past hour. Multiple calls to Harrison Financial Services, several encrypted messages, and what appears to be coordination with parties outside the hospital. The color drained from Maya's face as she realized the implications. Our security systems hadn't just been recording her past communications. They had been monitoring her current activities, capturing every panicked response to her exposure. You've been monitoring my phone? Maya's voice rose with indignation that would have been more convincing if she hadn't just confessed to selling our private information to corporate predators. We've been monitoring all communications related to protected accounts and business operations, Connor corrected calmly, which includes any device that has accessed our secure systems using your credentials over the past year. This was a revelation that sent Maya into full panic mode. She had been using her legitimate access to our business systems to gather intelligence for Harrison Financial, not realizing that every search, every document she accessed, every file she downloaded, was being tracked and recorded by the very security measures she thought she was circumventing. The most interesting development, Connor continued, is the emergency protocol your contacts at Harrison Financial appear to be implementing right now. They're attempting to accelerate their timeline, probably because they realize their asset acquisition strategy has been compromised. On Connor's screen, we could see real-time financial movement. Harrison Financial was liquidating positions, transferring funds, and apparently attempting to distance themselves from Maya's activities. The predatory investment firm was abandoning their inside source now that her cover had been blown. Maya's phone buzzed with an incoming call that she answered with visible desperation. Yes, I understand the situation has changed. No, I don't think I can maintain. What do you mean the contract is void? I listened to her side of the conversation with grim satisfaction as Harrison Financial apparently cut her loose, canceling whatever arrangements they had made and leaving her to face the consequences of her actions alone. The consulting fees they had paid her for intelligence about our business were apparently contingent on her maintaining her position of trust, a position she had just destroyed through her emotional confession. They're terminating your consulting arrangement, Lucas observed with the analytical detachment of someone watching a psychological case study unfold. Whatever they were paying you for, they don't think you can deliver it anymore. Maya's desperation transformed into rage as she realized she had sacrificed 15 years of friendship and professional relationships for promises that evaporated the moment she became a liability. "This is all your fault," she snarled at me, her voice carrying venom I had never imagined possible. "If you had just stayed unconscious for another week, if you hadn't created these paranoid security systems, everything would have worked perfectly." But Connor had one final revelation that demonstrated just how thoroughly Maya had underestimated our preparations. Actually, Maya, the security systems were specifically designed to handle exactly this scenario. Someone we trusted gaining access to our business, developing external relationships that compromised that trust, and eventually revealing their true intentions. He pulled up a document that made Maya's face go white with shock. A comprehensive dossier that David Harrison's firm had been building on her activities for months, triggered by automated alerts when her communication patterns began suggesting potential conflicts of interest. "We've known about your relationship with Harrison Financial for almost 6 months, Connor said quietly. "We've been documenting everything, building a legal case, and waiting for you to reveal the full scope of your intentions." Maya stared at the evidence of her own destruction, finally understanding that she hadn't been executing a brilliant scheme. She had been walking into a trap that had been set long before her betrayal began. The prey had become the predator, and now it was time to spring the final snare. The moment that would haunt Maya for the rest of her life came when I slowly sat up in my hospital bed, my movements deliberate and controlled, my eyes clear and focused with an alertness that made her stumble backward in shock. The cognitive confusion she had been counting on, the medicated haze that had given her such confidence, evaporated like morning mist as I spoke with perfect clarity. "Hello, Maya," I said, my voice steady and strong. "I've been listening to everything you've said for the past 9 days. Every phone call, every lie, every plan you thought you were making in secret." The transformation in Maya's expression was immediate and devastating. The realization that I had been conscious, aware, and listening crashed over her like a physical blow. She gripped the arms of her chair, her knuckles white with the force of someone trying to anchor themselves to a reality that was shifting beneath their feet. "That's impossible," Maya whispered, her voice barely audible. "The medications, the cognitive impairment," Dr. Everdeen said. "Dr. Everdeen said exactly what we needed her to say," I replied calmly. Once she discovered that someone had been authorizing medications designed to keep me artificially sedated, she became very interested in helping us understand who was responsible and why. Lucas stared at me with a mixture of relief and amazement that made my heart ache. I could see him processing the implications, that I had been protecting him and our business, even while appearing helpless, that the confusion and vulnerability he had witnessed were carefully orchestrated performances. "You've been awake this whole time?" Lucas asked, his voice thick with emotion. "Listening to everything, watching Maya." "Not the whole time," I clarified, reaching for his hand. "But for the past week, yes. Since the night Harriet Reed, my night nurse, realized I was more alert than my chart indicated, and helped me contact David Harrison." Maya's face went through a series of expressions: shock, betrayal, rage, and finally a cold calculation that suggested she was still looking for ways to salvage her situation. "You can't prove anything. Everything I did was authorized through proper legal channels. Lucas signed all the documentation willingly, but Connor was already displaying the evidence that would destroy that defense." "Actually, Maya, we can prove everything. The security systems you didn't know existed have been recording all of your activities. including the unauthorized medication requests you made using forged family member credentials. On Connor's screen, a devastating timeline emerged that showed Maya's manipulation in precise detail. Medical records she had altered, pharmacy requests she had submitted using false information, and most damning of all, audio recordings of her phone calls where she discussed keeping me sedated long enough to consolidate her control over our assets. The beautiful irony, I said, watching Maya's face as she absorbed the scope of her exposure, is that you helped us design many of these security systems yourself. You recommended the monitoring software, you suggested the automated backup procedures, you even helped implement the communication logging that recorded your own conspiracy. Maya's composure finally shattered completely. "You manipulative bitch," she snarled, abandoning any pretense of friendship or professionalism. "You set me up. You knew I was struggling financially. You knew Harrison Financial was offering me opportunities you would never provide, and you let me walk into this trap." "I didn't set you up, Maya," I replied with calm finality. "You set yourself up. Every choice you made, every boundary you crossed, every trust you violated was your decision. I simply prepared for the possibility that someone close to us might choose betrayal over loyalty." Lucas was studying the evidence Connor continued to display, his analytical mind processing the timeline and scope of Maya's deception. "She's been planning this for almost a year," he said, his voice carrying a mixture of hurt and disgust. "The suggestions about updating our legal documents, the recommendations for new security procedures, the insistence on being our emergency contact for everything, it was all preparation." The most sophisticated part, Connor added, was how she positioned herself as indispensable while simultaneously creating the vulnerabilities she planned to exploit. "She convinced you to rely on systems she controlled while building relationships with parties who wanted to acquire your business at distressed prices." Maya made one final attempt to control the narrative, her voice taking on the desperate tone of someone who had lost everything and was grasping for any remaining leverage. "You'll never prove intent. I can claim everything was done with good intentions during a medical crisis. Harrison Financial will deny any improper relationship. You have circumstantial evidence and recordings that could be interpreted multiple ways. But I had been saving the most devastating revelation for last. From beneath my hospital blanket, I retrieved a small recording device that Harriet Reed had helped me conceal, a device that had captured every conversation in my room for the past week. "Maya," I said, holding up the recorder, "I have your voice clearly stating that you deliberately manipulated my medical treatment to keep me sedated. I have your confession about selling our private information to Harrison Financial. I have you admitting that you've been planning to steal our business for months." The recording device represented the final nail in Maya's coffin. Unambiguous evidence of her crimes in her own words, recorded while she believed I was unconscious and unable to hear her confessions. Maya stared at the device with the expression of someone watching their entire future disappear, finally understanding that her elaborate scheme had been nothing more than an elaborate form of self-destruction. The arrival of Detective Louis Hayden and FBI agent Abigail Roman transformed my hospital room into the epicenter of what would become one of the most comprehensive corporate fraud investigations in the region's history. Maya's face went ashen as she realized that our evidence hadn't just exposed her betrayal, it had triggered federal involvement due to the interstate nature of her conspiracy with Harrison Financial Services. "Maya Roman," Detective Hayden said, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had spent years building cases against financial predators. "You're under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, identity theft, unauthorized access to protected financial systems, and conspiracy to commit elder abuse through medication tampering." The formal charges hit Maya like physical blows. She had expected embarrassment, professional consequences, perhaps civil litigation. She hadn't anticipated criminal prosecution that could result in decades in federal prison. "This is insane," Maya protested as Detective Hayden read her rights. "I never committed elder abuse. Jenna is 34 years old, not elderly, and I never accessed any systems I wasn't authorized to use." Agent Roman, whose sharing of Maya's surname was purely coincidental but seemed grimly appropriate, consulted her tablet before responding. "The elder abuse charges relate to your systematic medication tampering designed to incapacitate Mrs. Hayden. Age isn't the only factor. Deliberately causing cognitive impairment in a vulnerable adult qualifies under federal statute. As for system access, you used stolen credentials and falsified authorization to access protected accounts containing over $2 million. Lucas watched the proceedings with the stunned expression of someone discovering that their reality had been an elaborate fiction. $2 million? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Maya, you were trying to steal $2 million? That was just the beginning, Connor said, consulting his laptop where additional evidence continued to emerge. The Harrison Financial communications show they were planning a systematic acquisition that would have ultimately given them control of your entire business portfolio, including your real estate holdings, intellectual property, and client relationships. Conservative estimates suggest the total value approaches $8 million. Maya's attempted theft hadn't been desperate opportunism. It had been a calculated heist that would have destroyed everything Lucas and I had built while leaving us financially ruined and professionally discredited. The scope of her betrayal was breathtaking in its ambition and devastating in its potential impact. The most damaging evidence, Agent Roman continued, comes from your own recorded confessions over the past week. Federal wiretapping laws allow for recording when individuals have reasonable suspicion of ongoing criminal activity. Mrs. Hayden's recorded evidence of your conspiracy is completely admissible. Maya's attorney, summoned by her panicked phone calls but clearly unprepared for the scope of the charges, attempted damage control that was doomed from the start. My client was operating under extreme emotional stress, caring for her best friend during a medical crisis. Any statements she made were taken out of context and don't reflect criminal intent. But Agent Roman had dealt with similar defenses countless times. Your client's communications with Harrison Financial Services began 8 months before Mrs. Hayden's medical emergency. The conspiracy was planned, systematic, and involved multiple federal crimes, including wire fraud, mail fraud, and violations of interstate commerce regulations. As Maya was processed for arrest, she made one final attempt to manipulate the situation through emotional appeal. "Jenna, please," she said, her voice breaking with what appeared to be genuine despair. "We were friends for 15 years. I made mistakes, terrible mistakes, but I never wanted to hurt you. Can't we find some way to resolve this without destroying my entire life?" I looked at Maya, really looked at her. Perhaps for the last time. The woman who had stood beside me at my wedding, who had helped me build my business, who had been present for every major moment of my adult life. But I also saw the person who had systematically planned to destroy everything I loved, who had drugged me to maintain control, who had sold my private information to predators. "Maya," I said quietly, "you destroyed your own life the moment you decided that our friendship was worth less than Harrison Financial's money. I didn't betray you, you betrayed yourself." The finality in my voice seemed to break something fundamental in Maya's resistance. She stopped struggling against the handcuffs, stopped making appeals, stopped trying to control a situation that had moved far beyond her ability to manipulate. As law enforcement escorted Maya from the hospital room, Lucas sank into the chair she had occupied for so many days, his head in his hands as he processed the magnitude of what had almost happened to us. "How did you know?" he asked finally. "How did you see this coming when I trusted her completely?" I took his hand, feeling the warmth of genuine connection after days of performance and deception. "I didn't know it would be Maya specifically," I admitted, "but I learned a long time ago that the people who can hurt you most are the ones you trust completely. The protections we built weren't about paranoia, they were about wisdom." Outside my hospital window, I could see Maya being placed in a federal vehicle that would transport her to a future she had never imagined when she began this scheme. Justice wasn't always swift, but when it arrived, it was thorough. The weeks following Maya's arrest brought a restoration process that went far deeper than simply returning stolen assets or rebuilding damaged business relationships. Lucas and I discovered that healing from betrayal required confronting not just what Maya had done, but how her systematic manipulation had slowly altered our perception of ourselves and our capabilities over the years. She was right about one thing: Lucas said during one of our evening conversations as I recovered at home, my grandmother's wedding ring finally back where it belonged. We did rely on her expertise more than we probably should have. Not because we couldn't handle things ourselves, but because she made dependency feel like efficiency. Dr. Connor Hayden, the neuropsychologist who had helped establish our original protection protocols, worked with both of us to understand the psychological impact of Maya's long-term manipulation. Her methods had been subtle but devastating, gradually convincing us that we needed her guidance for decisions we were perfectly capable of making independently. Financial abuse often works this way, Dr. Hayden explained during one of our sessions. The perpetrator creates artificial dependency by handling tasks the victims could easily manage themselves, then leverages that dependency to gain control over increasingly important decisions. Over time, the victims begin to doubt their own competence. The business recovery proved surprisingly straightforward once we understood the full scope of Maya's interference. Our clients, far from being concerned about my medical crisis, were actually relieved to work directly with Lucas and me again, rather than through Maya's increasingly controlling filter. She had been making our relationship with you unnecessarily complicated, admitted Harriet Everdeen from our largest account. Always insisting on being the primary contact, scheduling meetings at her convenience rather than ours, adding layers of approval that seemed excessive for routine project modifications. Working with you directly feels refreshingly simple. Connor Reed's investigation revealed that Maya had been systematically complicating our client relationships, creating artificial friction that positioned her as essential for smooth communication. She had convinced clients that Lucas and I were too busy for direct contact, while convincing us that clients preferred working through a dedicated account manager. Harrison Financial Services faced federal investigation that would ultimately result in the firm's dissolution and criminal charges against several executives. The predatory investment strategy Maya had helped them implement had targeted dozens of small businesses across multiple states, using inside sources to create artificial crises that justified below-market acquisition offers. Your case became the keystone that brought down their entire operation, Agent Roman explained during a follow-up interview. Maya's recordings provided evidence of systematic fraud that connected to similar schemes they were running in other markets. She thought she was getting rich, but she was actually documenting a criminal enterprise. The personal healing proved more complex than the professional restoration. Lucas struggled with guilt over signing the authorization documents that had given Maya temporary control, despite understanding that his decisions had been made under deliberate manipulation during extreme stress. "I keep thinking about all the signs I missed," he said one evening as we walked through the garden behind our home. Her questions about our security arrangements, her insistence on being involved in every major decision, the way she always seemed to know exactly what to say to make us feel grateful for her help. But working with Dr. Hayden helped us understand that Maya's manipulation had been professional-grade psychological warfare, not obvious red flags that we should have easily recognized. She had used her legitimate access to our financial information to identify our vulnerabilities, then exploited our trust to position herself as indispensable while gradually gaining control over our decision-making processes. The most profound healing came from recognizing how much stronger our relationship had become through surviving Maya's betrayal. The crisis had revealed Lucas's fundamental integrity and my own resilience, while demonstrating that our partnership could withstand even sophisticated attempts to destroy it from within. We built something she couldn't take apart, I realized during one of our recovery sessions. All her planning, all her manipulation, all her years of positioning herself as essential, none of it could actually damage what we created together. She could steal assets, she could forge documents, she could drug me unconscious, but she couldn't destroy our actual partnership. David Harrison visited regularly during my recovery, helping us understand the legal ramifications of Maya's prosecution, while updating our security protocols to prevent similar betrayals in the future. But his most valuable contribution was helping us see Maya's scheme as validation of our success, rather than evidence of our vulnerability. "Predators target valuable assets," David observed during one of our consultations. "Maya's elaborate conspiracy was actually a testament to what you've built together." She wouldn't have invested a year of planning and risked federal prosecution to steal something that wasn't genuinely valuable. As my physical recovery completed and Maya's trial date approached, Lucas and I found ourselves stronger individually and as partners than we had been before her betrayal. The experience had taught us to trust our own judgment, to value our natural instincts, and to recognize that true security comes from understanding our own capabilities rather than depending on others to manage our lives. Maya had tried to steal our business, our assets, and our future. Instead, she had accidentally given us something invaluable: absolute confidence in our ability to protect what we had built together. As I sit here today, wearing my grandmother's ring and reflecting on everything that happened, I want to share something crucial with everyone listening to this story. What happened to me wasn't just about one woman's betrayal. It was about recognizing the patterns that make all of us vulnerable to manipulation by people we trust. The most important lesson I learned is this: the people who can hurt you most are always the ones closest to you. Maya didn't gain access to my life through force or deception. I gave it to her willingly because I trusted her completely. And that trust, while beautiful and necessary for meaningful relationships, becomes dangerous when it's blind and absolute. But here's what I want you to understand. Being betrayed by someone you trust doesn't make you naive or foolish. It makes you human. Maya's manipulation worked because she exploited basic human needs: the desire for help during overwhelming times, the comfort of having someone knowledgeable handle complex tasks, the relief of sharing burdens with people who care about us. Every woman listening to this has probably experienced some version of what I went through. Maybe it wasn't elaborate financial fraud, but perhaps it was a friend who gradually isolated you from other relationships, a family member who convinced you that you couldn't manage your own decisions, or a partner who slowly made you dependent on their guidance for things you could handle perfectly well yourself. The signs are always there, but they're designed to be subtle. Watch for people who position themselves as indispensable, who always seem to know exactly what you need to hear, who gradually take over more and more aspects of your life while making you feel grateful for their help. Be suspicious of anyone who discourages you from seeking independent advice or who creates artificial urgency around decisions that benefit them. But most importantly, trust your instincts even when you can't articulate why something feels wrong. I had moments over the years when Maya's helpfulness felt too convenient, when her solutions seemed to benefit her as much as us, when her knowledge of our private affairs seemed excessive. I dismissed those feelings because I couldn't prove anything was wrong, but those instincts were trying to protect me. Protection isn't about becoming paranoid or refusing to trust anyone. It's about creating systems that don't depend entirely on other people's good intentions. The safeguards that saved my business and my marriage weren't built because I suspected Maya specifically, but because I understood that valuable things attract predators, and intelligent protection requires preparing for threats you hope you'll never face. Document important decisions, maintain independent relationships, keep some resources that only you control, and never give anyone complete authority over your life, no matter how much you trust them. These aren't signs of paranoia. They're signs of wisdom. If you're currently in a situation where someone controls too much of your life, where you feel dependent on their guidance for decisions you used to make confidently, where you've gradually lost touch with your own judgment, know that it's not too late to reclaim your autonomy. Start small. Rebuild your confidence in your own capabilities. Reconnect with independent sources of advice and support. Remember that true friends and partners want you to be strong and independent. They celebrate your capabilities rather than highlighting your limitations. They encourage you to trust your own judgment rather than always deferring to theirs. Anyone who makes you feel weak, dependent, or incapable of managing your own life is not protecting you. They're controlling you. Maya tried to steal my business, my marriage, and my future. But she couldn't steal my strength, my intelligence, or my ability to protect what matters most to me. Those qualities belong to you too, and no one can take them away unless you let them. Trust yourself, protect yourself, and never let anyone convince you that you're not capable of managing your own life. You are stronger than you know, and that strength is your greatest protection against anyone who would try to take advantage of your trust. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.